Hello, I am Peter Okocha. Welcome to Focus on Africa, our top stories. South Sudan's President Salva Kiir has agreed a deal on the formation of a unity government with his rival Riek Machar. But will this one last? The world's population of once critically endangered mountain gorillas is making a comeback in Uganda. On the verge of collapse, the BBC investigates how 10,000 buildings in Nairobi are still standing even though they are critically unsafe. Also on the program, from remote regions to the radio. This traditional Kenyan music is at the heart of a passion project 18 months in the making.
After we had set up the initial mobile recording studio, we had carried out our first recording. We played back the community, their voices, and this was the first time they'd ever heard their voice in playback.
And in sports, a huge backlash follows the unveiling of an artwork commissioned by Italy's Serie A to combat racism in football. Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. A new unity government may soon be a reality in South Sudan. President Salva Kiir says he's reached a deal with the country's former vice president and rebel leader Riek Machar to form a long-delayed coalition. Both men have been meeting over the past 3 days in the capital, Juba, to resolve outstanding disputes that have prevented them from meeting previous deadlines. The two leaders had agreed in September to establish a power-sharing government. Since 2013, Kiir and Machar have signed several ceasefire agreements, including some lasting just a few days. The conflict in the country can be traced back to December 2013. The civil war has killed 400,000 people and driven nearly 4 million from their homes. There have been concerns that war could resume in South Sudan. On Monday, the United States imposed sanctions on 2 sitting South Sudanese ministers, accusing them of obstructing the young country's peaceful efforts. Well, Alan Boswell is a senior analyst with the International Crisis Group. He joins me from Nairobi. Alan, cynics will say we've been down this road before.
We have been down this road before. This is the third deadline that these two leaders have set in the past year. What I saw actually as a headline is that they didn't actually reach any breakthrough. So this looks like the latest in a round of commitments and promises, whereas the actual issues underneath it still seem to be remaining unresolved.
Then why do you think then that they've announced this agreement? Because I do know that there's been a whole lot of international pressure, not least from the regional body IGAD, and just on Monday the Americans put sanctions on 2 ministers within the government in Juba. Is this pressure now bearing fruit?
Well, I think the pressure is bearing some fruit, in as much as I agree that these two are trying to find a way to make it look like they're not responsible for the delays that are going on. Each one wants to blame the other. But I think the pressure so far hasn't been sufficient to get them to actually bridge these impasses. And one of the things we've seen is that in the past it was always the regional heads of state who mediated at this very top level between these top 2 leaders. And thus far we haven't seen that level of mediation really take place in the past year.
Alan, let's talk a little bit about within the country itself, because a lot of the times we describe this conflict as a misunderstanding between 2 personalities. How much how much do the people of South Sudan actually want this conflict to be resolved amongst the ethnic communities?
Yeah, I've done a lot of traveling around South Sudan during the civil war, and the frustration is extremely high. Oftentimes you'll find that even when you're in communities that are supporting one of the specific leaders, that they'll have no problem criticizing that leader as well and expressing their frustration. So the level of frustration is extremely high with these two, but it remains true that no one's quite found a way of pushing either of the two aside. The other thing I'll just say is that although they are 2 personalities who have a very long, bitter history, they also do represent, between the 2 of them, many different communities in the country. And South Sudan was an extremely challenged state when it was born. And so some of this is not just the personality, some of this is just the degree of the long road ahead that South Sudan was always going to face moving on after independence. And
very briefly, I don't want to just dampen anybody's spirits here, but should we be taking this agreement then with a pinch of salt?
You should be taking it with a giant pinch of salt. I think the important thing, though, is that they have stopped fighting for the last year, these two leaders. So although they've had difficulty bridging these final issues, they have stopped fighting. So we could be on a path towards actually starting to consolidate that peace and finding a way forward.
Alan Boswell from the International Crisis Group in Nairobi, thank you very much for your input into this story. Let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. Angola's government has recovered more than $5 billion stolen from the state this year. The country's justice minister said the money included $3 billion siphoned off from the Sovereign Wealth Fund. The son of Angola's former president, José Eduardo dos Santos, who headed that fund, is on trial for corruption. He denies the charges. The Mozambican authorities have detained 12 Iranians caught allegedly shipping drugs off the coast of the northern province of Cabo Delgado. Occupants of the vessel are said to have set it on fire moments before their arrest, destroying approximately 1.5 tons of heroin suspected to be on board. The army in the Democratic Republic of Congo says it has captured 291 Rwandan rebels and handed them over to the Rwandan army. They were captured in South Kivu province, which borders Rwanda in the east of the DRC. Up to 10,000 buildings in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, are unsafe and may collapse. That's a warning from the Kenyan government. In the past few months, hundreds of people have died in several building collapses. The Kenyan government says it is taking measures to ensure building regulations are adhered to. But as the BBC's Francis Otomwa reports from Nairobi, critics are skeptical.
The collapse of this 6-story building in Nairobi's Embakasi estate has left a trail of death and destruction. This is the latest building to collapse in the capital. And Kenya's National Construction Authority says that there are over 10,000 further buildings at risk of collapse in the country. Just 3 months ago, 8 students died when the roof of their classroom came down at a primary school in Nairobi's Dagoretti area. And in April 2016, a similar tragedy occurred at another estate, Huruma, a residential area northeast of Nairobi. More than 50 people died in that tragedy.
Huruma is one of the city's most expansive residential areas and one that has been listed as having the highest number of risky buildings. I am here on a mission to find out some of these condemned houses and why Nairobians are still living in these death traps.
40-year-old Bridget Awor was rescued from the rubble, bloodied and clinging to her daughter. Her husband died in front of her.
The building sank right before my eyes. At the time I was holding my baby and everything just came down on me. I thought I was going to die. Luckily, someone came and pulled the rubble that was on top of me.
24-year-old Tracy Kahendi is also reeling from the Huruma tragedy. Her 2 brothers died in the collapse.
There are so many houses around here that have been earmarked for demolition, but shockingly, the houses are being inhabited. Government officials know this too well, but they are not doing anything.
Martin Aluga is a civil engineer based in Nairobi.
The government recently came up with a list of those buildings in Nairobi which should not be occupied. But do we know the buildings?
But the head of safety compliance at the Kenya National Construction Authority says the government is taking decisive action.
When we come across a dangerous structure, our first thing is to stop it. And if the owner is adamant and they continue with that construction, we bring in the next level, which is the law enforcement agencies, and this thing is stopped. There's no cause for panic.
But many people in Nairobi are not so sure. Take the case of this building in Nairobi's Utawala estate, which the authorities say could collapse any moment, but it's business as normal. Francis Ontomwa, BBC.
A three-day global summit on refugees has opened in Geneva today. The UN Refugee Agency describes the last 10 years as a decade of displacement and says the meeting is intended to find better long-term solutions. But how do you change perceptions where refugees are seen as a drain on resources? Marguerite Barankitse is a refugee herself and founder of Maison Shalom, which helps other refugees. She says refugees can be of benefit to societies in which they settle.
We must see a refugee like our brother, our sister, our kids. We can't see them as a charge, but an opportunity, because they have talents. Then if you welcome them, they are doctors, they are engineers, they are teachers.
If you look at countries in Africa, like, there's Sudan, there's Algeria, there's Uganda, there's Tanzania. But, if you take the issue of Tanzania now, that has been threatening for a while now, that it's going to send all its Burundian refugees back. I mean, what do you say to a government like that?
If you accept your brothers coming there, they can economically give you the talent. Why you are afraid that your neighbor come to rebuild you? So
you don't think it's enough for you to just build tents for these refugees who are fighting conflict or fighting persecution?
Why build tent? Why we are princes and princesses? Why we must be under tent, plastic tent? Why? You can invite them to build themselves. In a refugee camp, I give the example in Rwanda. In the east, we are 8 in the Mahama camp. We are more than 60,000 people there. It's a city.
But do you understand sometimes that some people are worried that if you allow these refugees and you begin to give them permanent status, they can eventually come and take over, cities or towns in your country?
Why you are afraid for your brothers and sisters? It can change. If you are afraid of your brother, then he will, because he is frustrated, then he will want to revenge and to give you problems. If you frustrated somebody, it's you who have those frustrations in your side. Then I see, because I work with Maison Shalom, with kids, child soldiers, street children, and children in conflict with the law. When they came in Maison Shalom, I welcomed them and said, okay, now you are going to rebuild your life.
Marguerite Barankitse speaking to me there. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okwoche. Still to come on the program, Esperance finish on a high at the FIFA World Cup in Doha. I'm Peter Okwoche. Our top story this hour. South Sudan's President Salva Kiir has agreed a deal on the formation of a unity government with his rival Riek Machar. Now, good news from Uganda for animal lovers. The world's population of once critically endangered mountain gorillas is making a comeback, and that's according to the latest survey of their protected forest home. A census was carried out last year in Bwindi Impenetrable National Park in Uganda and the Sarambwe Nature Reserve in neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo. In total, that's 340 square kilometers of transboundary habitat. It revealed that in 2011, there were around 400 creatures in the area. That figure now stands at 459, combined with results from an earlier study in nearby Virunga Massif, an area at the intersection of the DRC, Rwanda and Uganda. It suggests the global population of the primates now stands at 1,063. The South African government this month launched a 25-year review report, which is an assessment of what progress the country has made since the advent of democracy. President Cyril Ramaphosa admits that poverty is still widespread amongst black South Africans and attributes the unequal distribution of wealth to years of apartheid rule. My colleague Sophie Kenya recently spoke to the Archbishop of Cape Town, Thabo Makgoba, and started by asking him what can be done to reduce inequality and poverty in South Africa.
Our children's children are living in poverty, and the children of those that took the land by force are living in wealth. So this inequality is real. We need to deal with it.
So what's the one thing you, as a church leader, really would tell South Africans?
Me, as a church leader, I will tell South Africans that please do not abandon hope. It was hope that really made us to come to Britain, go somewhere to say, please have sanctions because the evil of apartheid is not good. It was hope that said we don't want all the whites to go. We want to live together in a non-racial South Africa because we had a vision of us coexisting. But now it is hope that will tell us that the economic outlay and infrastructure is creating this inequality. So let's change this economic infrastructure. Let's change how politicians can make decisions on our livelihood and not like create anarchy, but create the society we want to as South Africans. And only hope can do that, not despair.
A lot is also happening. We have the Commission of Inquiry into what they're calling the state capture.
Yes.
The revelations are quite startling and alarming. Are you, first of all, are you surprised by what you're hearing?
Well, I didn't know the quantum of the thuggery, I must say. I didn't know that so much money that could have rebuilt South Africa was stolen. I was one of those that went into the streets, went into Parliament and called for President Zuma to step aside. I was one of those that marched to Parliament and spoke about no to corruption. But it was just from a sense that something was going wrong. But I didn't really quantify it. So it is shocking, and I'm glad it is coming out. But my prayer and hope, again, is it will be one of those commissions that exposes and life just continues. There should be consequences. At least President Ramaphosa must set an example with one of his trusted generals who have put their hands into the treasury and sent them to jail.
Very interesting stuff there. You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's now time for some sports. Mimi?
Thank you very much, Peter. It was the 5th place playoff at the FIFA Club World Cup today, and Tunisia's Esperance are finishing off the tournament with goals galore after beating local champions Al Sadd 6-2. Same, their Bali with the winner in the 87th minute. Elsewhere, Liverpool are getting ready for their clash against Monterrey, who are the winners from North and Central America in the semi-final on Wednesday. Liverpool's first team are currently in Doha for the competition, but remember, they have a League Cup tie that kicks off in just over an hour's time here in England. They will field youngsters against Aston Villa in the quarterfinals with Algerian Yasser Larouchi, who could feature for them. To Serie A in Italy, where Hellas Verona have said that Ghana international Agyemang Badu is fit to play again. The 29-year-old midfielder was hospitalized back in August when it was discovered he had blood clots in his lungs. Badu missed out on the Africa Cup of Nations in Egypt this summer, having just returned from an 11-month injury in March. He's currently on loan from rivals Udinese. Staying with Italian football, where Serie A has had to defend its latest anti-racism campaign. The posters, which will be shown at the Serie A headquarters in Milan, show 3 monkeys with painted faces. The artist behind them is known for creating images of the animals, which many of you may know have been likened to black people as a racist trope for decades. Serie A say true art is provocation. The anti-discriminatory body fair have criticized the campaign, saying once again, Italian football leaves the world speechless. Daniele Veri is an Italian football expert. He's been following the story and sent this update. Sorry about that. Now moving on. Defending champions Kenya were stunned 4-1 by Eritrea in the semi-final of the East and Central Africa Senior Men's Challenge Cup, also known as Sekafa, on Tuesday at the Lugogo Stadium in Kampala. In the other semi-final, Uganda beat Tanzania 1-0. Elsewhere, Andre Ayew says he wants to help Swansea City do something great and is not thinking about speculation about a January move away from the Liberty Stadium. To rugby, where a new sevens tournament has been set up and will feature Uganda and Zimbabwe. The World Rugby Sevens Challenges Series will start in February to boost rugby sevens development across the globe. A women's series will also be launched. That's all the sport, Peter.
You're a fan of rugby?
Yeah, the Rugby World Cup for me was quite interesting. It's funny because I interviewed Mauro Itoje from the England rugby team. Yeah, today. So it's good to see how it's growing on the continent. Efforts are being made for it to appeal to a diverse community.
You know, Nigerians don't really think of it as a great sport, right?
We did speak about that.
I don't know why, but, you know, we'll see.
We did speak about that because, you know, football is dominant across the continent, but they're making efforts.
Mimi, thank you very much for the sports. Thank you. Now, from remote regions to the radio, a group of DJs have spent 18 months working to bring traditional music from Kenyan communities into the mainstream. An album and video documentary show why this has been a passion project for those involved. This is their story.
Samburu pastoralists from north central Kenya sing their own brand of music. Now, these traditional songs are being recorded by Kenyan DJs.
We went to Samburu and recorded traditional samples from the women, warriors, elders and children, and in turn brought back the samples to Nairobi, cleaned them up and sent them to about 30 producers around the world. By producing that environment, we were able to get these recordings which sound as natural as possible, literally undocumented.
One of the most special moments of this project was after we had set up the initial mobile recording studio, we had carried out our first recording takes, we played back the community, their voices, and this was the first time they'd ever heard their voice in playback. They were used to a lot of people going there and recording them, and they never see anything coming back.
Now these traditional songs are being kept for posterity.
The long-term aim is to create a digital archive of traditional sounds and also to find a way to create a sustainable mode of income for the communities that we work with.
So future generations can tap into this traditional music.
Being from here, I can tell a Maasai vocal in a track, but you think about the average consumer, they don't have any idea of where this vocal is coming from. So importantly, this project is meant to tell that tale of where this vocal is from, where the tradition is from, and how it came here.
What a great project. It's got me in a dancing mood now, but not today. Just before we go, another look at our top story. A new unity government may soon be a reality in South Sudan. President Salva Kiir says he's reached a deal with the country's former vice president and rebel leader Riek Machar to form a long-delayed coalition. Both men have been meeting over the past 3 days in the capital, Juba, to resolve outstanding disputes that have prevented them from meeting previous deadlines. Don't forget, you can get in touch with me and the others on the team. I'm at Okwache. But for now, that's it from Focus on Africa. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.